Jota miettiessäni yritin palauttaa mieleeni jonkin oikein vahvan onnistumisen kokemuksen omilta kouluajoilta. Mieleeni palasi muisto, jossa minun kirjoittamani runo valikoitui Oulun koulun kohiin. Oulun koulun kohia on edelleen vuosittain ilmestyvä lehti, jossa julkaistaan Oulun alueen alakoululaisten piirustuksia, kirjoitelmia ja runoja. Edellisenä vuonna hyvän ystäväni kissa-aiheinen piirros oli julkaistu kyseisessä lehdessä, ja mietin, että jospa minunkin työni joku päivä nähtäisiin kohinan sivuilla. Kovasta kilpailusta huolimatta, näin kävikin seuraavana vuonna, kun Nokkelan jääkiekkoaiheisen metaforan sisältänyt runo oli listattuna Patamäen ala-asteen töiden joukossa. Runoilija minusta ei tullut, mutta sen muistan, että onnistuminen tuntui minusta hyvältä. Olin ylpeä runostani ja merkittävyydessään tapahtuma ei ollut minulle yhdentekevä. Kuinka hyvin onnistuit? Mikä sai sinut onnistumaan? Tällaisia kysymyksiä voidaan esittää itselle erilaisten arkisten tapahtumien yhteydessä, jotka vaativat arviointia. Esimerkiksi penkin alle mennyt jalkapalloottelu tai suurta mielenkiintoa herättänyt konferenssiesitys voidaan altistaa omissa pohdinnoissa tarkasteltavaksi syistä, miksi tilanne tai suoritus meni niin kuin se meni. Opetus- ja kulttuuriministeriön viime vuonna julkaisemassa Tulevaisuuden kouluraportissa todetaan, että kansainvälisessä vertailussa oppimistulokset ovat laskusuunnassa. Vaikka mahdollisia tekijöitä tälle trendille on monia, ainakin yhtenä osatekijänä voidaan pitää juuri kouluun liittyviä motivationaalisia ongelmia. Tehtävien mielekkyyttä voitaisiin lisätä. Tämä väitöstutkimus ottaa kantaa tähän ajankohtaiseen keskusteluun nostamalla esiin tutkimustuloksia ja menetelmiä tilanteista, joissa lapset ovat onnistuneet koulutehtävissä. Tämän tutkimuksen alkukipinänä on ollut tavoite selvittää, mistä esi- ja alkuopetusikäisten lasten onnistuminen oppimisen tilanteessa koostuu. Erityisenä mielenkiinnon kohteena on ollut selvittää, millaisia syitä lapset näkevät onnistumiselle oppimisen tilanteessa. Mistä nämä onnistumisen kokemukset koulun kontekstissa sitten kumpuavat? Koulussa suoritetaan luonnollisesti tehtäviä eri oppiaineissa tai oppiaineita yhdistelevissä projekteissa. Koulutiensä aikana lapsi kohtaa lukemattoman määrän erilaisia tehtäviä niin koulussa kuin kotona läksyjen muodossa. Kyseessä on aikamoinen määrä erilaisia tehtäviä vaikeuden ja innostavuutensa osalta. Toinen on yksinkertainen suoritus, joka ei vaadi sen kummempaa paneutumista asian suoritukseen, kun taas toinen tehtävä saattaa tuntua jo lähtökohtaisesti ylitse pääsemättömältä. Yksi tehtävä on todella mielekäs ja toinen kuuluu siihen oppiaineeseen, josta en niin välitä. Yhteistä näille tehtäville kuitenkin on, että niistä suoriutumisen syitä voidaan luetella ja ehkä myös jopa arvioida. Jos ajatellaan, että koulutien aikana altistutaan edellä mainitulle suurelle määrälle tehtäviä, on oletettavaa, että koulun päätyttyä onnistumisia kuin myös turhautumisia ja epäonnistumisia. Tämän lisäksi lapset havainnoivat luokassa vielä kavereiden onnistumisia ja parhaimmillaan luokkakaverin onnistuminen voi vakuuttaa oppijan siitä, että myös hän itse voi suoriutua vastaavanlaisessa tilanteessa. Kuten esimerkiksi minun tapauksessani, kaverin kissapiirros antoi minulle uutta pontta runon kirjoittamiseen. Kasvatustieteen ja kasvatuspsykologian alalla on viime vuosina kohdistettu kasvavaa kiinnostusta itsesäätöistä oppimista tukeviin, ennustaviin tai estäviin yksilöllisiin, vuorovaikutuksellisiin ja järjestöllisiin tekijöihin. Väitöstutkimusta motivoivana taustana onkin oppimaan oppimisen, ajattelun ja ongelmanratkaisutaitojen merkityksen nouseminen niin varhaiskasvatuksen ja koulun tavoitteissa ja opetussuunnitelmissa aikaisempaa keskeisemmälle sijalle. Oppimisen säätelytaidoilla viitataan niihin taitoihin, jotka ovat olennaisia onnistuneen oppimisen kannalta. Oppimisen itsesäätelyn katsotaan kattavan oppijan toimet niin käyttäytymisen, kognition ja motivaation osa-alueilla, ja itsesäätelytaidot ovat yhteydessä paitsi hyviin oppimistuloksiin, myös oppimisen motivaation ja strategisiin taitoihin. Itsesäätöistä ja taitavaa oppia voidaan luonnehtia henkilöksi, joka ylläpitää tavoitteellista ja strategista työskentelyä kohti asettamaansa oppimistavoitteita. Hän pohtii tehtävän luonnetta ja valitsee sen suorittamiseen sopivia toimintatapoja ja strategioita. Työskentelyn aikana hän tarkastelee tietoisesti omaa toimintaansa ja suoriutumistaan ja säätelee toimintaa siten, että tehtävä voidaan suorittaa tarkoituksenmukaisella tavalla. Lopulta tehtävän suorittamisen jälkeen taitava oppija arvioi mahdollisimman realistisesti, miksi tehtävä meni niin kuin se meni, siis miksi onnistui. Omien onnistumisten arviointi voidaan siis opetella ja tukea osana koulun käytäntöjä. Oppimisympäristön ja käytäntöjen muokkaaminen voi tarjota mahdollisuuksia lapsille oman ja toisten toiminnan arvioinnille luokkahuoneen tilanteissa. Näitä teemoja on käsitelty ensi syksynä vaiheittain voimaan tulevassa opetussuunnitelman uudistuksessa, jossa oppimisen taidot mainitaan yhtenä laaja-alaisista taidoista, joihin opettajien toivotaan jatkossa kiinnittävän huomiota. Uudistuksessa ajattelun ja oppimaan oppimisen taitoihin viitataan esimerkiksi ongelmanratkaisukyvyllä, oppimisen itsesäätelyllä ja tämän tutkimuksen kannalta merkittävällä oppimisen arviolla. Tutkimuksessa onkin huomattu, että juuri koulupolun alkutaipaleilla oppimisen itsesäätelyyn liittyviä taitojen tukeminen on hyödyllistä. Parhaita tuloksia on saavutettu erityisesti silloin, kun itsesäätöisen oppimisen kaikkia osa-alueita harjoitellaan ja koulussa on riittävästi monipuolisia tilanteita harjoitella näitä taitoja. Lisäksi itsesäätelytaitojen harjoittelu tulisi liittää osaksi jatkuvaa työskentelyä, jolloin oppilaiden työskentelytapoihin pyritään vaikuttamaan pidemmällä aikavälillä. Meta-analyysissään vuodelta 2008 Charlotte Dignat kollegoineen tarkasteli alakouluikäisille lapsille kohdennettujen itsesäätöisen oppimisen interventioiden toimivuutta. Meta-analyysissä havaittiin, että interventioilla oli myönteinen vaikutus lasten itsesäätöisen oppimisen taitojen kehittymiseen, mutta tutkimuksessa havaittiin myös, että interventioiden vaikutus oli suurempi nuorilla lapsilla kuin vanhemmilla lapsilla. Carol Beckin tutkimusryhmässä on pitkään selvitetty, miten lasten ajattelutavat ja uskomukset itsestä oppijana muokkautuvat. Useissa eri tutkimuksissa he ovat havainneet, että jo varhaisessa vaiheessa osa lapsista on kehittänyt ajattelutavan, jossa ihmisen kyvykkyys on jotakuinkin pysyvä ja että omalla toiminnalla ei ole suurta merkitystä siihen, miten esimerkiksi oppimisen tehtävässä onnistuu. Miksi edes yrittäisin, kun kerta olen huono matikassa? Toisessa ääripäässä ovat lapset, jotka uskovat, että omalla toiminnalla voi olla vaikutusta siihen, miten tehtävässä suoriutuu. Nämä lapset uskovat, että mikäli yritän tarpeeksi, minulla on mahdollisuudet suoriutua näistä matematiikan tehtävistä. Myös aikuisilla ja heidän antamalla palautteella on osansa lasten ajattelutapojen kehittymisessä. Merkityksellistä on, korostaako opettaja niitä asioita, joita lapsi voi mahdollisuuksien mukaan tehdä toisin, tai joihin lapsi voi itse vaikuttaa, kuten vaikka vastoinkäymisestä piittaamaton yritys, vai antaako opettaja lasten ymmärtää, että onnistuminen on esimerkiksi matematiikan tehtävässä johtuu heidän sangen pysyvästä kyvykkyydestä, jolle lapset eivät voi juurikaan mitään. Väitöskirjan tutkimustavoitteet on jaettu 4 alakohtaan. Ensimmäinen tavoite oli selvittää tekijöitä, jotka auttavat lapsia onnistumaan jokapäiväisessä oppimistilanteessa. Toinen tavoite keskittyi tarkastelemaan, miten lasten itsesäätöinen oppiminen ilmenee luokkahuoneessa ja kuinka sitä tuettiin oppimistilanteessa. Kolmannessa tutkimustavoitteessa selvitettiin, kuinka lapset nimesivät syitä heidän omalle ja kavereiden onnistumiselle oppimistilanteessa. 4. tutkimustavoite pyrki kehittämään vaiheittain lapsilähtöisiä, osallistavia tutkimusmenetelmiä alkaen perinteistä videoaineistoista, edeten aina lasten itse keräämään valokuva-aineiston hyödyntämisen haastattelujen tukena. Väitöstutkimuksen aineisto on kerätty suomalaisissa esi- ja alkuopetusluokissa. Väitöstyön jokaisessa osatutkimuksessa ovat omat osatavoitteet. Ensimmäisessä tutkimuksessa tarkasteltiin esi- ja alkuopetusikäisten lasten osoittamaa sinnikkyyttä yksilö- ja paritehtävissä. Aineisto kerättiin videoimalla ongelmanratkaisutehtäviä, joissa lasten tuli sommitella värikkäitä puupalikoita paperilla annettuun muotoon. Aineiston analyysi keskittyi tarkastelemaan lasten vuorovaikutusta ja tilanteessa onnistumia tukevia ja vaikeuttavia seikkoja. Toinen tutkimus selvitti, kuinka alakouluikäiset lapset selittivät onnistumistaan koululuokan oppimistilanteissa ja kuinka lasten oppimista tuettiin kyseisessä tilanteessa. Tutkijoiden luokkahuoneesta keräämään videoaineistoa hyödynnettiin videoklipein tuetuissa haastatteluissa, joissa lapsia pyydettiin kertomaan syitä heidän onnistumiselleen oppitunnilta valikoituun tilanteeseen. Kolmas tutkimus tarkasteli, kuinka alakouluikäiset oppilaat selittivät koulukavereidensa onnistumista oppimisessa. Aineiston keruussa hyödynnettiin osallistavia lapsilähtöisiä menetelmiä, kun lapsia pyydettiin salapoliisileikin varjolla ottamaan kuvia heidän luokkahuoneen onnistumisen tilanteista. Näitä kuvia hyödynnettiin myöhemmin haastatteluissa, joissa lapsia pyydettiin kertomaan syitä kuvissa kuvattujen tilanteiden onnistumiseen. Tutkimuksen analyysissä keskityttiin ainoastaan niihin kuviin, jotka oli otettu luokkakaverin tilanteesta. Väitöskirjan artikkelit sisältävät useita erilaisia analyyttisiä lähestymistapoja, mutta pääasiallisena analyysimenetelmänä on käytetty aineisto- ja teoriaohjaavaa sisällön analyysiä. Hyvät kuulijat, tämän väitöstutkimuksen tulokset osoittavat, että koululuokassa tapahtuvan onnistumiseen vaikuttavat sekä lasten oma toiminta kuin myös opettajien ja kavereiden toiminta. Lasten yksilölliset taidot, kuten sinnikäs työskentely ja kyky suoriutua tehtävästä, auttoivat heitä onnistumaan oppimisessa. Olennaista oli myös tuki, jota lapset saavat oppimisen aikana. Selittäessään omia ja kavereiden onnistumisia lapset kuvailivat sitä konkreettisten toimien kautta. Lapset selittivät onnistumisen johtuneen toimista, joita he itse tekivät tehtävien aikana, kuten tehtävien aktiivinen suorittaminen ja heidän kokemansa kyvykkyys suoriutua tehtävästä onnistuneesti. Työn eräitä keskeisiä tuloksia on se, että antaessaan syyselityksiä omien tai ikätovereiden onnistumiskokemuksiin koulu-uransa alkuvaiheessa lapset tuottavat puhetta onnistuneeseen suoritukseen tarvittavasta toiminnasta, käyttäytymisestä ja tehtäväspesifeistä taidoista, eivät niinkään puhetta yleisestä kyvykkyydestä tai vertailu- ja kyvykkyystasoista, kuten myöhemmissä ikävaiheissa. Toisin sanoen, lapset selittivät onnistumisia toimien kautta, joihin pystyy itse vaikuttamaan ja kontrolloimaan, kuten esimerkiksi se, kuinka paljon tehtävässä yrittää tai kysyykö kaverilta apua. Aiemmin on havaittu, että tällaiset näkemykset tukevat lasten oppimista, sillä niihin sisältyy ajatus siitä, että oppimisen prosessi on jotakin, mihin vaikutetaan itse. Aikaisempi tutkimus on myös osoittanut, että jo alakouluikäisillä lapsilla on ymmärrys kyvykkyyden luonteesta ja että nämä näkemykset tarkentuvat ja eriytyvät alakoululuokille. Tämän tutkimuksen osallistujat sijoittuvat siihen ikäryhmään, jossa nämä näkemykset alkavat eriytymään ja mielenkiintoinen jatkotutkimuksen aihe olisikin tarkastella tarkemmin iän mukanaan tuomia vaikutuksia esimerkiksi valittuihin onnistumisen kokemuksiin. Tutkimuksessa havaittiin, että seuratuissa luokkahuoneissa lasten oppimista tukivat erityisesti opettajien tarjoama apu ja kannustava arviointi, jotka loivat luokkaan ymmärtävän ja rohkaisevan ilmapiirin. Opettajat tukivat lasten oppimista luokkahuonetyöskentelyssä muun muassa tarjoamalla vaihtoehtoja tehtävän suorittamiseen sekä kannustamalla ajattelemaan ja arvioimaan itse, miten tehtävässä kannattaisi edetä. Opettajat käyttivät myös innostavia arviointimenetelmiä oppilaiden vastausten arviointiin. Esimerkiksi oppilaiden antamia vääriä vastauksia käytettiin koko luokan keskustelussa rakentavasti ja ajattelua eteenpäin vievästi luoden luokkahuoneeseen uskaltavan ilmapiirin. Aiemmissa tutkimuksissa onkin havaittu, että jo sillä, miten aikuinen, esimerkiksi luokassa toimiva opettaja, osoittaa lapsille onnistumiseen liittyviä syitä, vaikuttaa siihen, miten lapset toimivat vastaavanlaisissa tulevissa tilanteissa. Metodologisesti tämä tutkimus osoitti, että oppimisen tutkimuksessa on mahdollista kehittää lapsilähtöisiä osallistavia tutkimusmenetelmiä, joilla voi olla relevanssia myös käytännön opetustyön kanssa. Erityisesti kahdessa viimeisessä osatutkimuksessa lasten osallisuutta aineistonkeruussa on pyritty kehittämään kuvin ja videoin tuotuissa haastatteluissa. Menetelmällisesti tässä tutkimuksessa onnistuttiin siis kehittämään haastatteluja sellaisiksi, että lapset pystyivät kertomaan konkreettisista tilanteista, jotka olivat tapahtuneet juuri heille, seikka, joka on aikaisemmissa tutkimuksissa havaittu auttavan lapsia vastaamaan haastatteluissa. Työn eräänä oletuksena ja odotettuna implikaationa on, että tieto siitä, miten lapset näkevät hyvää suoriutumista ja onnistumista tukevina tekijöinä, voi johtaa tehokkaampiin ja korkealaatuisempiin opetuksen ja oppimisen tapojen tunnistamiseen ja itsesäätöisen oppimisen tukemiseen. Toimintatapojen uudelleen miettimiselle ja järjestämiselle onkin olemassa hyvä tilaus, kun uusiutuva opetussuunnitelma näitä toimia vaatii. Eräs näistä on huomion kiinnittäminen lasten tukemiseen vahvuuksien tunnistamisessa ja suotuisien oppimista koskevien uskomusten rakentamiseen. Koulun tuleekin pystyä kehittämään mekanismeja, joilla oppilas pystyy arvioimaan oppimistaan myös itse. Asetetaan tavoitteet ja arvioidaan sitä, kuinka hyvin oppilas saavuttaa. Keskeisiksi tekijöiksi oppimisen arvioinnissa nousevat edistymisen arviointi, ohjaaminen, tukeminen ja kannustaminen. Aiemmissa tutkimuksissa on havaittu, että juuri kouluteen alkupuolella itsesäätöisen oppimisen taiteen kehittäminen kannattaa, koska lapsilla nämä taidot ovat vielä kehittymässä ja tiukat uskomukset omasta pystyvyydestä tai kognitiivisista rajoitteista eivät ole vielä muotoutuneet. Näitä itsesäätelyn taitoja kaivataan tulevaisuuden tietotyössä, jossa ihmiset joutuvat mukautumaan yhä monitahoisempiin ja joskus jopa epäselviin haasteisiin. Tällaisessa tilanteessa oman toiminnan arvioimiseksi asetetut kysymykset, kuten oliko toiminnassani asioita, joita olisin voinut tehdä toisin, nousevat olennaisiksi kysymyksiksi, kun yksilön tulee muuttaa omaa toimintaansa tarkoituksenmukaisemmaksi jatkoa ajatellen. Now I request Honorable Professor Bosnitsa, as the opponent nominated by the University of Oulu graduate, offer any criticism to which my doctoral dissertation, in your opinion, gives rise.
First of all, I would like to thank the Faculty of Education for giving me the opportunity to be here as an opponent. Is an honor. It's really an honor. The dissertation, Young Children's Success in Learning Situations, Actions, Views in a Praise and Learning Context, submitted and presented by the candidate, lies in the center of current discussion on self-regulated learning in schools and preschools. The dissertation is based on 3 publications submitted to well-known peer-reviewed journals in the field, and I just list them. Trajectories of Resilience during Diet Task Performance among children 6 to 7 years of age. That's the first. The second, Finnish students' reasons for the achievement in classroom activities, focus on features that support self-regulated learning. And the third is what makes her succeed. Children making interpretations of their peers' success in learning situations. Why did I list all these publications? It is not often that you see a junior researcher is covering so many angles of specific aspects in a research field. Specifically not when the target group, the sample, is so difficult to research, based on their development, on their capacity to express their ideas and beliefs, and such complex constructs like resilience, success, and self-regulated learning. The methodological approach chosen by the candidates taking this complexity into account by further developing step by step or paper by paper the methods until he had a methodological approach at hand, which interestingly gives the data collection process into the hand of the subjects of the study. Or in other words, he developed a child-centered research methodology that made the subject a co-researcher in the field. Very often in dissertations like the one submitted and presented here, the candidate focuses on a very, very small aspect of reality. This dissertation is different. It has a much broader view on the reality, since it's focused not only on one construct, but on a broad range of them, naming only a few: selection, motivation, self-regulation, help-seeking, resilience, achievement and success, emotions, and a few others. And all of that while developing an innovative methodological approach. This is, saying at least, risky. Or in other words, a pretty tricky business. It is about balancing depth and broad, or width. The candidate managed the challenge, and it seems that I'm not the only one that has this opinion. It's shown by the reviewers of the publication he submitted, or the examiners, because otherwise we probably wouldn't stand here. So what makes this dissertation interesting is A, when one can learn something. B, when it's not only when the dissertation not only presents answers to an interesting research question, but also leads to more questions and ideas for future research. And when it makes someone want to ask questions. And I think that's the point where we now have a good possibility to ask these questions, and I think we should do that now and start with the discussion. maybe strange and not specifically scientific questions to start with, but it's always something I'm interested in when I'm talking about discussion. It's about why is someone deciding to choose a specific topic, or theoretically through this answer from a motivational point, why did someone cross the Rubicon to start working on a specific topic? What was the point that motivates the candidate to start working in this field, in this area, and choose such a complex field of research?
My dear opponent, I was doing my bachelor's thesis in how the theory of mind is aligned with the metacognitive capabilities of children and how do they develop hand in hand. So when I was doing it, my supervisor suggested me to apply to this research project that was starting at the time that they needed a research assistant. So I got into that research project, and I was, because it had kind of similar ideas, like how do young children, what about their thinking and how do they view stuff. So I was really interested at the first moment, like that there is this big broad concept, for example, the success, that what we were interested about, and how to kind of deal with that. And then we, of course, this thesis is done in the project, and during the project we developed the idea, of course, by myself and as a group also. But as you can see, as you said in your speech, the kind of steps are, you can see the steps from the development of the thinking from the articles. And through the articles, I think I've developed the thinking like step by step and going deeper. It's also like the results that we got from that, like starting from the first to guide the second, and then the results that you get from your research, they guide your thinking to like the broader or deepen your understanding about these issues.
Such step-by-step approaches are very often complicated to put into an overarching research question or under an overarching topic, because it's developing over time, which is tricky. Normally, very often you have a research question which leads you to a setup of different studies and a discussion at the end. But in the end, you have to answer, or everybody has to answer the question about what's the leading research question of the whole package. So I would be interested that the candidate would describe a little bit the overarching research question of the whole dissertation, or questions.
I think, like, if you look at the title, Success in Learning Situation, so interest about what makes them succeed in learning. Then you started to deepen it. You go to the theory of self-regulated learning from the individual side, and also how it's supported, because it's a kind of critical age range. So how it is supported, and like what in the self-regulated learning is such that makes children succeed. So, yeah, I think that kind of would be the overarching question.
It's difficult to find the, at least it was my impression by reading it, a little bit difficult to find the main question, because there are so many questions that go together as like a jigsaw puzzle. You add something here and there. So, because I'm asking this question specifically since I'm also interested in the question how different studies contribute to such an overarching question. So if I see that you say it's about success in self-regulated learning settings. So how would the candidate say that each study contributes to answering the research question?
My dear opponent, I would again go to the title of the thesis. No. You can open the. So the first would be like, what do the children do themselves? The actions. What do they do themselves? That what was the main point, I guess, in the first article. Then the second, how do they view, and also how do they are supported in that. And then what kind of appraisals they make about their own and their peer success. So again, these kind of these actions, views, and appraisals, they are like 1, 2, and 3 in a way. So I think that through those keywords, you can see how it contributed to those successful learning situations and also to the self-regulatory part.
All right, so it's actions in the first study, it's the views in the second study, and it's the appraisal in the third study. Sorry.
My dear opponent, the views and appraisals, because they are like what make them succeed. They are either they are telling about their own or they are telling about their friends. So these kind of, how do they view the success or the abilities, and how do they kind of appraise the situation?
All right. So let's go a little bit into a different direction, just slightly. The question here on my list, based on what I read in the dissertation, is how can the dissertation be located in terms of theoretical and educational implications? And the main question I have to the candidate is, what are the concrete practical implications of the findings? So what specific conclusion can we draw from the studies?
My dear opponent, I will start with how would they the views or appraisals that they made from the successful situation. It is important to know in that specific age that because their ideas of those situations are developing. So when they start schooling, it is important to find a ways how to make them to support, or how to support them to make these more constructive ways to think about their learning situation. And for example, in the third article we have developed, of course there is a developmental work to do with that, but that would be one like major implication also. But the thing is also that if you look at the teacher side, I think that, for example, the notion that we have, for example, coding the like videotape classroom situations, I think that there is this, without giving teachers a guideline what we are expecting them to do or what we are going to code, they still did this really important stuff, like for example giving good feedback, or like trying to make the children to elaborate them, not to be too critical, but to use them in a constructive way. For example, if someone is giving a wrong answer and so. So but still, one implication would be that there is still work to do in order to make the teachers more aware of, for example, what kind of feedback do they give the students, whether they say that someone is smart, or whether it's more like, can you do something differently, or can you put more effort in it?
So, what the implication would something like that have for teacher education programs? What is the goal of university? What should university do? How should university change to reach the goal you're describing?
My dear opponent, maybe these things, because like now we are in the developing these things in the curriculum, that they are more emphasized. But by the way, these are the things that should be developed. So I think what could we do with teacher education students would be that these things are more practically, theoretically, like made well known for them. Like these are the issues, and it's grounded on this theory, self-regulation. And that, of course, would help them to tackle with the new demands of the curriculum reform. So.
Make them even more reflective. I don't know the Finnish already everything available. I know for the German context, we urgently need information like that. We urgently need that if our teacher education students this background which is described in your dissertation. Let's move on to the question of success, which is in the center of your work. When I'm reading a piece on success, I'm always wondering, what is success? It's not just the definition, but success can have some different dimensions, so different approaches. When does a student succeed? And it's not always just the cognitive part of it or the knowledge or something like that. So, in the light of the study, can the candidate say something how he would describe this success, or what's the success students should achieve? In the light of the study, and on the other hand, the question about what we very often realize in school settings, or settings at all, is that students succeed or not succeed despite equivalent conditions. Same teacher support, task characteristics, classroom climate, and so
on. My dear opponent, so what is success? Based on the articles or the research done here, I have to say that it's the abstract term, like what we was facing when we were asking, like, but it gives the individual the space to think of what is the success in his or her perspective. So that makes it interesting, and I would say that what is success is your individual interpretation. Doing one math test would be a success for someone, but for someone who is more able, it wouldn't be like, it wouldn't hold that much of a meaning. For example, from the data, I remember this one picture from taken from here, who in the interview the child was describing that I took a picture because he or she, not usually, these are hard for him usually. So now he got it done, and I took a picture of it. So it depends on what do you think is the success, like for someone, like something that is really minor for someone might be something really major for someone else. So it's kind of situated, but I know the problematic of it, and it's yeah. And why we decided to use the success, we used the term onnistua in Finnish. There's a little bit of a lost in translation here because, but we wanted to use the onnistuminen because it's kind of, I described it in one, was it in the second article, that it's like a kind of a loosely term, but it's in kind of child's language. So again, like make a decision that they would understand. And for example, the word achievement would be saavutus. And when we were talking about like prepping them for taking the pictures, and we were talking about like success and achievement, and so is the word, or success is the word that everybody knows. So that kind of why we decided to use the success is also kind of a practical decision.
And it makes a lot of sense. My question is, if you're following the idea of individual developments and success is based on how a student, from the point of view of the student, but still how a student is developing and starting at a specific point and increased knowledge or behavior or whatever, shouldn't something like that have also an impact on assessment and diagnostics in school? And which implication would something like that have for PISA, for example?
My dear opponent, the one major thing that that teachers are currently, because the new curriculum is emphasizing, for example, the new kind of way for, well, the opening speech was in Finnish, but the one major thing was that the schools now need to think of evaluation a little bit, and more from individual perspective, but also from that the child would take a part. Because, like, if you're giving the grade, that leads to more comparative. But if your progress in some, like, whether it's a subject or progress in your project work is followed, then it's more of a like individual, and I think that would lead more to mastery orientation, that you figure out what needs to be done in order to be better, and so, but it's not like that one has 8 and the other one has 6, for example. When you make a comparison, you're not that much focusing on what I need to do better.
I remember one part in the papers where the candidate was talking about comparison between the students, and as far as I remember, it's that they are not comparing each other, they are comparing their own process. And you use the term mastery orientation, and when we're talking mastery goal orientation, we're also thinking about performance-oriented goal orientation, and which is probably a typical US distinction. I'm wondering how much culture is in your interpretation in the view of mastery orientation and the comparison between students. Because paper from Mansfield, not so long ago, Mansfield published a paper where you showed that there's something like a comparison component in performance orientation is not available, not there, or accepted in the Australian context, but very much in the US context. So I'm wondering how much culture or cultural background is in the study.
dear opponent, well, one thing, for example, in Finnish culture, there's not that much of SATs, for example, like the first cross-sectional valuation that you do is if you go to high school, then you have at the end of it you can have that's nationwide, but before that there is nothing. So the evaluation itself hasn't been based that much on the grading, for example, and so. But I don't know. This might be a bit too hard.
It's a tricky question.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically if you're not doing research with cultural dimension. But it's always interesting to see when we are doing interpretations of data, and to see that people with a different cultural background, coming from another context, are having different interpretation of the same setting. So that was why I was asking the question. So your focus lies on success, and with regard of success and self-regulated learning, I'm wondering what we are missing when we are talking about success. What in sense of affective dimensions, for example. So focusing just on the success, is there anything in the data which shows how relevant motivation and emotions are in the process?
My dear opponent, the one aspect that I start with the emotion. One thing that we used also in the interview was this kind of labeling of emotional states, but I didn't use it in my own studies. But giving them a set of these kind of pair cards when there was pairs in a different emotional and we asked how did the situation feel? The thing is that what we found that most of them felt nice. So that perhaps that was the one reason that I kind of dropped out in order to keep my papers concise, because that kind of answer doesn't necessarily have that much wings. Well, it shows that the succeeding is nice. The motivation part, that directly from the data, how would you see it? Being proud of even it's for example, if we look at the second article where we talk about their own success, being proud, or it was an easy task for me, and I have also raised the wording easiness, to what does it actually mean, and but basically when you're talking about the situation, the interpretation of the motivational side of it, it's more like the researchers how, for example, these answers that they gave are dealing with their motivation.
I think there are quite a number of aspects in the work which, leads one to think about emotional motivational aspects in the study. Seeing some of the photos, it was already to see it in the face. It's just exciting to see. Let's move to study one. let's go into the single studies. So the first study was let me go back to that. Trajectories of resilience during pediatric task performance among children 6 or 7 of age. And we all know that when we are working with the terminology resilience, there are hundreds of definitions on the market. So it's a little bit like everyone who writes a paper on resilience defines the resilience, produce a brand new definition of resilience. And I'm always wondering if that's necessary, but that's not the question. The question is, would the candidate please define or describe for the audience and me his understanding of resilience in general, and even more specific in context of study, so that we can start from this thing.
Okay, so the key question about, my dear opponent, the key idea behind the resilience is the bounce back. You face an adversity and then you bounce back. And how do I, for example, how it relates to self-regulatory theory is the thing that you need to do something in order to continue. Like you notice that there is a problem and you need to either be perseverant, or then you need to, for example, ask for help, or like you need to regulate your behavior in order to deal with the situation. In this paper, we focused on these like everyday adversities, like for example, in this peer tutor dietic task, we focus on those like little setbacks that occurs in the classroom, like everyday situations. Whereas the more traditional research on resilience is about like having really tough time, for example, in your personal life and so forth, and trying just to cope in that. And yeah, but we focused on those like the things that happen like every day in school.
And that makes a lot of sense. Mark Morgan wrote a paper in which he described that the little things, not the large things, that makes someone resilient or not. But it's interesting that you used the term coping, or to cope, in context of resilience. It's interesting so far that in our research group we are discussing this topic since quite a while, asking the question about, do we need to construct resilience at all? Or can we simply work with coping, or an extended view of coping?
My dear opponent, I have heard that when I was working more with while I was doing my first paper, I came across this same notion that, okay, what is it there to offer if we, for example, have coping? Now looking back at it, I more find similarities. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with like coping research or theoretical of it, but I find more similarities with self-regulated theory. And now my question would be that where do we need the resilience if we have the self-regulation? So.
Is that a question to me?
That's kind of like if there's an adversity that you need to cope for, you need to do something. If I would be me like a few years back, I perhaps like would have chosen the theoretical framework. But then again, I think we did quite nice, at least theoretical work in the paper, dealing with these like everyday adversities. That like, because the one point was that now if we're talking about resilience, that it kind of the research has been focusing on such a small amount, like having the worst conditions. So I mean, everyone have those adversities, and basically those like everyday like turnouts are the ones that affects.
I think that this decision to focus on the everyday adversity was really a good one. But I still have to ask another question in regards to the definition. Sorry about that. But the definition is bouncing back. And that sounds pretty depressing to me. It's resilience could be also part of a learning experience, which could have a positive effect on myself as a student or my learning at all. So is resilience just bouncing back?
My dear opponent, of course, if you look at it, that some kind of a struggle needs to be done when you're learning. Like, if you're learning something new and difficult, then you need to kind of struggle to understand the issues or the content. Yes, if you are not in your comfort zone, you need to learn something new. Then kind of the resilience or bouncing back is like the evident part of it. Like that is the part of it that needs to be there. Yeah.
So anyone want to follow you with the idea, drop resilience, stable self-regulated learning? It explains much more of the problematic situation which we are facing. But still, the last question on resilience, I'm sorry. The other question we're always discussing is the question of resilience, a state or a trait concept. And looking into the model the candidate presented in his paper, it's this dynamic process-oriented model. I'm always wondering, state or trait? Yes or no?
My dear opponent, perhaps I'm choosing the both because because what we look at it is what the children do individually, but also how for example, the appearance of the teacher or the adult or the tutor is affected. So I'm not sure whether it is even wise to think that you could take either one, that it's like you could take the context out and choose only that, because we're like human beings are like people in context. So
yeah. Pretty good Swiss answer. Very good. In paper one, the candidate stated this kind of design was assumed suitable for study of resilience in a learning situation. Full stop. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the suitability of the design? Because that was one of the parts I couldn't really follow.
My dear opponent, I would again start with the everyday situation, because as I said in the theoretical part, we were interested about the things that every child comes across in like basically day in schooling. So first would be that it's a really kind of typical problem-solving task that you might come across with your peer, and there is like, if you have the adversities or problems during the task solving, there is the tutoring child that can help you, or then there is the adult. And so you can ask help if needed. Then the maze puzzle that we use, that they need to put the different colored blocks in the specific form in the paper. It kind of gradually getting like gradually harder. So you start with the kind of more simple, and then basically it was kind of challenging. You really need to struggle in order to get them, and you really need to ask for help and figure out with your peer how are we going to do it, and negotiate about the correct answer. So I think that the combination of these, that the everyday kind of, or that it's like quite normal situation, you're figuring out with your peer how to do stuff, but then again there's like the challenge. Yeah. So it is expected that they kind of that they face adversities, or they really need to be persevering in the test platforms.
So how far are these didactic tasks representing the real-life classroom situation? It was a step-by-step approach where one peer was introduced into that, was taught to become a teacher in a way, or a tutor. Mm-hmm. And how far is that a real-life classroom situation? I'm also talking about ecological validity.
My dear opponent, I mean, the teacher can, for example, ask, I mean, this SRL supported features, the teacher can guide the students that like help each other. For example, if you're doing like in the classroom, you can say that it's fine to ask your peer to give help for you, and then I mean, you do a cool work in the elementary school, so you do stuff in pairs. So I think that of course would there be like this kind of in geometry lines. So I think that it kind of corresponds at least a possible situation. It's not like a task that they necessarily do every day, but at least it's like possible.
I mean, I'm asking that because I think we have to get more and more into research with a higher level of ecological validity and not just experimental designs. And I had the impression that in the setting described in the first study, students were pulled out of the normal situation, put in another room. So that was the question I was asking. Is there more an experimental design, or there's some real life classroom situation? No, let's have a look into the coding system used to code resilience. And on page 445 in the paper, first page. Support from adults as external reports, and they state adult intervenes with children when children do not proceed in the task. Intervention includes repeating the instruction. I'm wondering, isn't intervention counterproductive for a cooperative learning process? So students are working together, and then they try to find something out,
My dear opponent, the researcher was doing intervention if, well, let's say that they couldn't start with the problem. This was also a study about like peer tutoring. So if there was, because the other child was brought in the classroom, the situation, and then if the instruction for how to do the stuff was inadequate, then the researcher, if nothing happened, so to say, that the other child gave the instructions and then just sat silently, and the other one was like, so then there's like, but of course he or she didn't repeat the instructions if they were in the middle of the doing and like cooperating with the test.
Yeah, it's just that I'm always wondering, when researchers intervene, don't we manipulate the setting in a way?
My dear opponent, well, that's one conclusion, but I guess that is like a reaction to, like, if you have given a thorough instruction to another child and then the other one is brought in the situation, then you start like, and then the kind of both of them freezes, so to say. So you kind of react to that. So like that's kind of natural. That like go on.
The categories of codes, the risk section. There's frustration, helplessness, and inadequate level of complexity, a totally different angle, a totally different perspective. Because the frustration, helplessness is focusing on the child who's struggling, and the inadequate instruction is something missing. There's something happened to the child in a way. So, isn't there something missing in this coding system? I'm wondering. Probably could say no, but yeah, just to add one thing, the other section of the coding system is internal assets and external support. And with risk, you have frustration, helplessness, and inadequate instruction. Could also be internal or external risk or something like that.
My dear opponent, yes, that could, but when there is like 3 different categories, I'm not sure whether that it's needed to like categorize them like externally. Of course, the 2 frustration helplessness are the like the individual or the pair, like that the pair itself are like they stop doing, for example. So the inadequate instruction is there because it's a kind of peer tutoring situation, and if the other child don't give enough instructions how to do it, then it's kind of the situation doesn't necessarily lead to it.
I can follow that. From coding point of view, it's not necessary, but from a more theoretical driven point of view, it's something to consider. Just want to stay in this area and take another quote. On page 449, the candidate wrote, through the intervention of the researchers, almost every event ended with a positive outcome. That I think was interesting. In one of our own observation study, we found that every time the teacher intervened in a cooperative learning setting, it didn't have a positive effect at all. Very often had a negative effect, but we talked about that already at another point. What made the intervention of researchers so effective?
My dear opponent, as I said, it was like gradually getting harder. So the stuff, the task that they were doing and, for example, couldn't continue. If the researcher said that, okay, this is not going anywhere and intervened, usually the instructions that he or she did helped them to figure out how it should be done. I mean, the adult instruction, like, why didn't you try the other one another way? You had that one already correctly, try to do. So, I mean, really scaffolding the stuff. But it didn't lead that every diet would have done the hardest test.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this doesn't mean that it's a study on effectiveness of intervention and not on student resilience.
What's your opponent answer? Eventually, the children needed to do the test by themselves. So, of course, it's a kind of good example of that. Like, if in classroom there is like 20 different children and someone is having a problem and the teacher comes, it gives an example that usually the teacher intervention or interference helps. But again, I would emphasize that the task was quite hard, and before the interference of the or intervention of the researcher, the students needed to first to like deal with setbacks and be really frustrated.
I get it.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. It's just that sometimes you have to, specifically with studies like that, it's how far can you control the situation that's going on. Just to sum up the first study, in regard to the overall outcome of the study, what would the candidates say is new, surprising, and specifically exciting in the result for them?
My dear opponent, I would say that the previous intervention of the adult is kind of emphasized in the discussion part. And so the previous studies have been mostly looking on the kind of classroom climate. For example, Johnson 2008, it was an interview from child's point of view, like what do you think that it's like makes you thrive in a classroom? What features of teachers? This study shows that when the kids are struggling, the intervention really kind of makes the difference. That would be one thing to raise up.
Okay, let's move on to the next study. Study 2 is also a video study, this time with follow-up interviews, but in real classroom environments. Very often it's stated on its own. So, could the candidate respond to this in light of the study? So, did it change anything? I mean, I remember last time I went to school with the video camera, the kids were hanging on my legs, asking me what I'm doing there, and so I was already in intervention just going there. That's why I'm asking.
My dear opponent, now it's a good time to talk about the cultural differences. Yeah. Of course, I've been like during these years, I've been presenting this in many places, and that's one really like first questions that ask, like, how did it affect when you are in the classroom, like with your video cameras? Well, I have to say that I don't think that it changed much. The children are, the schools that we are did the study, these are the practicum schools, so they are, students are used that there are, like, for example, students in the classroom, and sometimes, for example, collecting the data. That might have a slight effect, of course, but in a Finnish context, with a researcher being in a classroom, I would say it's more like how many of us who has eyeglasses remember that we have eyeglasses, like all constantly thinking that we have eyeglasses. So if there's a researcher with a video camera in the classroom, pupils tend to just forget it. So,
what a great research attitude.
So I kind of I understand your, like, but it's kind of hard to describe but I would say that this is the culture.
So the research, as far as I understood it, the researcher was selecting specific sections of the videos to discuss them with the children. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the selection process? I tried to find out how subjective or objective the selection of these sections were, because that had, from my point of view, that could have an impact too.
My dear opponent, it is described in the paper that the engagement student is actively doing a task, for example, writing or reading himself, and the achievement, getting something done. What we figured out during the data collection is that it's not really kind of simple to, like, whether it's like while you are doing something or while you're getting something done. And we also figured out that things that might start doesn't necessarily always end. So you need to also think of, like, the engagement part, or that someone is doing something that might, the process itself might be already being successful. Your question whether it's subjective or objective, it is subjective. It is objective in a way that we have these kind of guidelines that, okay, let's focus on these things. But it is researchers' subjective decision to take. And what we noticed in the interviews that at times the situation that we selected for some reason didn't have much meaningfulness for the kid. So, and that was also the reason for the development of the methodology. But I think we're going to go there later on.
I will pull out another quote now, which is, I think, on page 5 or so, where the candidate wrote, specific topics or subjects were not focus of our observation because we were collecting data in different courses or different subjects. Still, I'm interested. Looking into the data, and the candidate probably had the best view on what was going on in the data. What are some issues, some differences, which are not published, but which the candidate realized while watching the data?
Can
I say no?
My dear opponent, can you specify like what kind of differences? Or
I mean,
about the subject or
about the subject matter. So if there are religious science or arts or literacy or
no, my dear opponent, no problem. Of course, when you're in the, like, preschool or pre and first school, like mixed class, and first and second, for example, if you enter math class, then you expect to see, like, tasks that actually have the beginning and ending. But if you go to arts class, then it might be that they are already like they are making a, for example, drawing that they have started already like beforehand, and then it's only a one piece of it, and that they might not get it done in that, but so you have to like see the success part from based on what they did in the in that specific class. Yeah.
That's an answer to the more or less to the selection process. But in the description, or what I'm more interested in, what the students say, are there differences? Probably not.
My dear opponent, not that I can figure it out.
All right. There is a lot of help-seeking, help-giving in this study. Can the candidate relate this study a little bit to the help-seeking literature?
My dear opponent, in this study, we have reflected the help seeking as a part of SRL practice. So first, the student needs to figure out what is wrong, or I need a guidance in order to recognize the problem and then to seek help if needed. So that in the, for example, the Newman 2010, he discusses about it that it's kind of really effective self-regulation strategy. And what is important is that to have courage enough to ask for help from your peer and or for your teacher. It's a kind of a positive because you are not afraid of like so that they will think that you can't do. It's like the feedback thing is like a positive way.
But Newman and Karabanics also said that there are differences in the way of help seeking. It's a question about executive and instrumental help seeking. So does the teacher support was more, what was it, more instrumental, more executive help giving in a way? Did the students ask for executive help or instrumental help? So the whole teacher support angle is strongly related to that, at least I think.
My dear opponent, I haven't done that kind of an analysis from my data, but so I need to speak about what is my impression of it. I think if we're talking about the peer support, I think it's more like the executive, if I understand correctly, that it's like how should I do this?
Yeah.
And the instrumental would be more like trying to figure out ways or like
That's
yeah.
Newman.
So I would say that, but you to like have ask for more executive help.
Because my impression is when we're talking about support, that's what I asked, is that it really depends what support it is. It's not just about that there's supports on, but what type of support you see. And I thought that would be something where help-seeking literature could be very helpful to analyze the whole support section. of the study. When I was reading the dissertation, respectively the papers, very often I thought, why isn't the candidate not working with attribution theory? There is so much, would that be a theory that could explain the data? But on the other side, why should he? I mean, working with a model that fits, which is helping analyzing the data, but still, I'm wondering, and I'm asking questions.
My dear opponent, I have to say that I have been really much influenced about the attributional theory. At one point, I was looking the data, especially in the second paper, from the attributional and getting to know the binary theories and so forth. But I was thinking that the binary theory, perhaps, like, it's a really well through research thing, and with this kind of a success, because the binary already states that in attribution theory, usually people tend to attribute their successes in this way, and their failures in this way. So I'm not sure what could be added to the table if that's already so well established in the states. The previous question, sorry.
So, same question than the question I had at the last study. In regard to the overall outcome of the study, was new, surprising, specifically exciting in this study? Always what you write down, what we find.
Three things. How they were supported, the non-threatening assessment, which is really kind of crucial for this this whole thesis, and the teacher support. Those would be like the most essential thing that teachers did without them being guided to do so, or without we having an intervention about SRL supportive strategies. The second thing is that we were able to create a methodology to talk about this relatively kind of abstract thing in their classrooms. And third would be that how do they actually talk about it? The concrete things, the things that they did in order to do. And as I have told in the discussion part of this, those are the things that like you can do something about it. Not just saying that it's an easy task for me because I'm like good in math, period. But it's more like how do you do those things? And I think that that is some idea that can be developed in the practical teacher work. How to kind of figure out ways to talk with the children about these issues and how to prompt the constructive way to think about your learning process.
Let's move on to the first. Again, the first question is more a question of interest in regard to learn more, which is about what's not in the paper. This study is on peer success, and I know there were practical implications which led to the fact that the candidate didn't look into the own success of the student who took the pictures, but you have the data and the sources. So, is there anything interesting which was in the data on the success of the student who took the pictures, of his own success, which you haven't published. Curious to learn more. There's still a hidden treasure somewhere.
My dear opponent, that I'm not sure whether I can give you a good answer right now to that because
fair enough. Nothing you could have prepared for. It's exciting stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the method. I really enjoy the method. This is making students partner of the research project. Is such an exciting way of doing that, specifically that using the technology they are used to use in a way is extremely helpful. But still, there are some critical questions one can ask, and let's start with the question, which is pretty straightforward. Because I'm wondering, doesn't this approach interfere with the camera kids? I call it camera kids. Running around with the camera, his own learning. Yeah, watching, looking for some specific photos, focusing on the success of others.
My dear opponent, 2 points. First, as I explained in the paper, in the introductory meetings, we didn't say that you need to take pictures from your peers. That happened, I guess, because of the method. The thing that you can't anticipate is that when you ask them to do both, but then you realize afterwards that okay, it is more natural to take a picture from someone else, and especially when you are doing it in this kind of a playful method, the detective. And you make a story that like detectives are subtle and they need to like act silently and stuff. So that, and also another thing from the ethical side is that during the introductory meetings, we said that, of course, we don't want that this causes problems to your your everyday work, and like every week, interviewing, talking with the teachers, how it has been. Has there been any problems? Does this affect you? Does the children that have the cameras or iPods, does it like? It's more like being in the research, trying to figure out what the teachers. I have to say that teachers like our data collection, and we left some of the iPods for them to use after the data collection in one classroom, because the one teacher was really into it to see how few of them, few of the pupils that she thinks that has like good benefit from their kind of stuff, like photographing home stuff. Yeah.
I think it's also an interesting instructional mode to a way of teaching, to reflecting about one's own success, but also the success of others, not just a research approach. So I fully understand why a teacher wants to keep that beside. I think it's always nice to do cameras in my drawer. In the dissertation, the candidate discussed the detailed aspects of reliability and validity of the studies. What I couldn't find so much was the question of objectivity and economy of the approach. And it's probably because it's a qualitative angle, but still, it's interesting to think about economy of the data collection, objectivity of analyzing the data, collecting the data. Could the candidate elaborate a little bit on these two dimensions of data collection, data quality?
My dear opponent, with economy you refer to?
Simplicity.
Oh, yep. Yep. And my dear opponent, what was the other?
Objectivity.
My dear opponent, let's start with the objectivity. As I described, and let's again go through the first, second, and third. First, you start with video observations. Then you do video observations, and you select the situation, and you try to make an interview easy as possible for the kid to understand, to be contextualized, and so forth. And at the end, you have a method where they actually do the decisions for you. The objectivity, of course, in the first and the second, it's a kind of researcher's decision, what we think about it and how do we interpret and analyze the data. But in the third article, I think we did take a step forward in that, so that if we had the problems in the second data collection about, is it the situations that we select, are they like SAR subjective, like even though we had the guidelines, then we thought that, okay, how can we affect this? Like, let's make them to decide what is the meaningful success. Into the interview, they already have made the decision for you. Like, this was the part because my friend was succeeding in this math test because this she has been struggling with it. The simplicity. As I said, in the limitations of this methodology, and I'm mainly talking about the two last ones, is that you need to be a lot involved with the second article, and you first observe and then you do the interviews, and then in the third one you basically trust the participants to do what you ask them to do. Of course, if you're being gone the other way, but as you said, if we want to move from those experimental situations, we need to kind of figure out how to do, and this is like taking steps in the dark, and you try something out, and then you learn from it. And I think the trajectory of the development can already be seen from this dissertation.
So that's the interesting part of research. Step in the dark, never know what's coming, and then hoping for the best.
My dear opponent, I think you wouldn't call research if we already would know the answer.
So, taking pictures was the approach in the third study. Wouldn't it be potentially better to give them video cameras?
My dear opponent, it's I hope you can do both. They also took videos, but they can be treated. I took them out from this study because in order to simplify the coding. However, now to think of it, the videos can be treated in kind of the same way than the photographs. There is this one single situation where that someone, for example, in photo elicitation, or would it be video elicitation or something, would tell the reasons why it was meaningful or why it got selected. So yeah, they could do both. We also used an app. It's called Story Row. But what we found was that there was only one boy who was really excited to making this, and he made really kind of cool, like where he described he made a video from several events, and then he talked. It's a kind of story creating app, very simple to use. But then we decided only to use the data that he told in the interview.
I'm asking because we used video cameras like that, when we gave video cameras to the kids and asked them to film what was going on, and that took so much energy out of the whole setting. It was just too much and changed the situation so dramatically that we really couldn't use the data. So that's why I'm asking.
Dear candidate, dear opponent, sorry, comment on that. So that was perfect. So yeah, based on what we have done here, I think it was a good decision to focus on the photographs, because I mean you can still ask, like, say it on your own views why it was as it was. If you make a kind of like, can you comment on the fly what happens on, as you say, I think it was a really good choice that mainly they took pictures.
I think so too. If I look into the categories of the picture analysis, I don't remember where it is.
Yeah, I can find it.
I think it's in the attachment. Yeah, it's in the attachment table too.
Oh yeah.
So I'm sure you explained it somewhere, but it's still there is in the products is this huge package of art in comparison to literacy and science and mathematics. Is there any explanation for that?
My dear opponent, I think because it's a kind of a product category, it's like, my expression about it was that when you get a drawing done, it's like you get a portrait done. I mean, it's like it's finished, and this was, I mean, it's something to picture. So again, it's dealing with the methodology more. Yeah, it's easier to see that this is now done than, for example, I mean, if you look at the math book, one page, there's like 10 different tasks. So in the arts, it's just more natural, perhaps, too. That would be my guess.
Having said that, doesn't that have an implication on the results you have? That this is a specific product focusing on a specific way of working and learning.
My dear opponent, can you rephrase?
Yeah, I know. I'm wondering if a product of a learning situation is not a piece of art. These are specific learning situations in comparison to the outcome of mathematics or literacy or science or something. I'm wondering if this specific learning situation or this specific way of introducing things had an impact on what you found. Makes sense. It's just so striking that it was just so much art. You explain why, without a doubt.
I think it might be the coding category also, that there is we found that there is like the enactment where there was persons, and then there was this product category where you see a finalized piece. And yeah, I think it's kind of the methodological that they, in the arts lesson, they like everyone finalized and they just took a lot of pictures. But that's, I think that's kind of one limitation also, that because the researcher is not around, then it's hard to kind of retrospectively think what might be the reason.
It's a very specific selection process which is going on there. So I was wondering, okay, before I ask the question I asked with all the other three studies, if you would be on my chair here, which question would you ask yourself?
My dear opponent, even though I said dear candidate, it's going to that's too tricky. Right now.
Yeah,
perhaps in 20 years. Perhaps in 20 years.
All right. So go back to the question I already asked with all the other two studies about the surprising, exciting stuff. You think that's it. So yeah.
In the third.
In the third, yeah.
I think, my dear opponent, I think the surprising was that, of course, after the data collection, we need to, for example, focus on the peers and that sort of stuff. But the surprising and interesting was that how interested and how like voluntarily they kind of get into this, and the excitement that, of course, well, not all of them, but the excitement that when they come to the interview and tell about them. We had some really, really cool interviews, I have to say, and the possibilities that this kind of methodology opens, for example, how to deal with the self-evaluation or so, that would be the one kind of wow stuff, I guess.
You said the possibilities. Can you elaborate on that?
For example, my dear opponent, for example, what I've been thinking of, what kind of purpose this would suit best for. I would turn, now it's from peers, but I would turn the shift back to your individual. Like, non-verbal way of children in kindergarten or preschool, first years of the elementary school, but when there is the verbal expressions might be hard, or writing down or using a Likert scale or so might be hard. So non-verbal way of following the stuff that you do in school. And with teachers' help, you can focus on, like, this student, for example, is struggling in maths. Let's try to make him think about every time that he has done things well. And then there's a lot of this talk about the implicit theory. But for example, using this kind of, for example, with the learning diaries data, of course there is the questionnaire aspect, but that's something just to deal with. It's not a problem, it's a challenge. to add that kind of data and have, for example, time series analysis or something like that, that is nowadays used in learning diaries. Of course, with a little bit older children, but with adjustments, that's one possibility.
Talking about older children, I know based on your background, that's the age group you're focusing on. Does the candidate think that there is an age limit in which a method like that would be useful? Let's say someone 19, 14 years wouldn't do that anymore, or is that even more exciting? I know you have no experience with that.
My dear opponent, actually I do. Well, the one thing that we did in, well, I was talking earlier about the commute in Vancouver. So we used the same, the one reason that I went there was that they were launching this, they heard about the professor in the university, heard Nancy Perry, heard about she visited here, and I went there too, and then we designed this because she thought that they have this data collection coming with struggling youth. So basically, well, teenagers starting from 13 to, well, most of the older one was like 18 and so on. So using this, how to use this kind of and in really kind of special education situations. So teenagers from like really harsh backgrounds like drugs and violence and that sort of thing. So what we did was that with the similar kind of ideas, ask them to take pictures about their autonomy, competence, and belonging and how these perspectives are supported in their special education practices. So we didn't have problems with that they would be older, that they wouldn't take the pictures. The biggest problems were perhaps like that someone can just be missing for 2 weeks and we don't know where he is. So that's but it's more like this special.
But that's the problem when after this talk.
Yeah. But I wouldn't say that this kind of stuff. Of course, you can't use this kind of detective playful. If you're talking about teenagers, then they wouldn't perhaps do. But with adjustments.
Let's frame the setting a little bit different. All right, let's come to the final question. It's the so what or the so why question. It's let's say the candidate wants to sell his dissertation to a publisher, and if you try to do that, they always ask you to explain why anybody should read that book. So it's a question of selling the dissertation now to people who didn't have the chance to read it. So why should anybody read your dissertation?
My dear opponent, I think it participates to ongoing, really topical discussion about how do we react to these new demands of curriculum, especially what comes to self-evaluation, or changing the way how we, for example, value the children, and also takes a discussion about the self-regulation part, which are one of those in the new curriculum. It's one of these, how do you say, cross-sectional themes that should be supported in the phenomenal-based learning.
So I think final. Sana said I'm old. I'm not getting old, but that's fair enough. Okay. Sorry. So thank you very much. I'm very impressed with the discussion. the candidate not only showed in the submitted material that he's able to develop a research idea and follow it through, he was also able to show this in the discussion today. There were some tricky questions, and I think the answers were absolutely convincing. As I said already in my introduction, he had a risky approach, working with so many different concepts, theories, angles, models, constructs. But he was able to balance what I said, depth and breadth, so in a very convincing way. And that fact was also underlined in the performance today. The candidate shows a deep understanding of the field and its underlying problems. And that's the interesting part and the exciting part of it, an understanding of the problem and challenges, not only from a scientific point of view, but also from a practical point of view, which is very often missing in research and educational contexts, focusing very much on cross-sectional designs and all these things. The empirical part of the study is convincing. The methodological aspect showed the potential that qualitative research can have, and sometimes doesn't have. And it's also convincing for people like me who have more quantitative angle. It's good to see people and young researchers who are doing qualitative research also thinking about question validity of the studies, reliabilities of studies, because that's also something which is very, very often missing in qualitative research. I'm sorry to say that. And one thing for sure, the approach has a high level of ecological validity with it. Coming back to what I said in the introduction, what makes a good dissertation? I learned a lot by reading the dissertation and discussing aspects with the candidate, specifically all the things which weren't in the papers in the dissertation itself. The research done by the candidate gives an answer to interesting research questions and an insight in what can be expected in future research, and I'm expecting a lot from this methodological approach, and from you. And it really made me ask questions. I enjoy asking these questions. When I'm saying that, there are already new questions popping up in my mind. I would like to thank the candidate for this very interesting discussion we had today. I would like everybody for the patience they have with me. Again, for the invitation to be an opponent in this setting, and I'm going to recommend to the University of Oulu Graduate School that I will accept Arttu Mykkanen's doctoral dissertation.
I would now like to invite those members of the distinguished audience who have anything to ask or remarks to make about my dissertation to ask the Gustav to be given the floor.
The defense ceremony is closed.